Well, joining us now is our journalist panel. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Stephanie Levitz, political reporter for the Toronto Star, and Joël Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to the three of you.
Thanks for having us.
So let's begin with Trudeau, and really beginning at the beginning of the week when essentially the Conservatives voted against this trade deal with Ukraine. A lot of reasons have been offered as to why they did so. What do you think is behind this, Bob?
Well, I largely think it has a lot to do with the People's Party of Canada. The Conservatives are worried about their far-right flank for some reason. It's beyond me why they are. And that and Maxime Bernier, as you know, is out there saying that we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine. We should basically backing Russia. I know this is nuts, but that's where they seem to be coming from. And it's got to be making a lot of Conservatives very uncomfortable. And what we saw with Mr. Poilievre the other day, when he blatantly lied about this treaty, saying that it was going to impose a carbon tax on these poor farmers from Ukraine, which is absolutely not true. Even the Ukrainian embassy had to put out a statement saying, there's no carbon tax in this trade agreement. They're talking about carbon pricing. And so, you know, Mr. Poilievre has had a really good run for the last couple of months, all summer, in fact, as he talked about housing and economic issues, and he tried to show himself to be a more easygoing and guy with a sense of humor. And what happened to him this week showed another side of Pierre Poilievre, and you just saw the Liberals jump on it, the Prime Minister nailing him as a MAGA kind of Republican that is going to bring that into Canada. That is going to be the campaign message that they take to Canadians. And Mr. Poilievre, if he keeps getting in these kind of tracks, this 14% lead he has may start coming down over the Liberals.
Yeah, well, without a doubt, Liberals have been saying this for months now. Once Canadians start scrutinizing Pierre Poilievre even more so, they're going to turn away from them. That's the Liberal argument. What do you make of what we saw this week, Stephanie?
One of the other things I think as Canadians are going to start scrutinizing Mr. Poilievre that they're going to see is a rigid commitment to his ideological principles. This is a guy who is beloved by MPs, beloved by the party, because he has said the exact same things for 20 years. And one of the things he has said ever since it sort of surfaced as part of our policy dialogue in this country is that he was opposed to carbon taxes. Setting aside the fact that we're not sure whether Mr. Poilievre would actually cancel the existing carbon price scheme on industrial emitters, that's something he's not really gotten into. He's very, very clear that he opposes a consumer price on carbon, and he believes it's an anathema, and he believes it's punitive, and right now there's a fight going on in the Senate that has been going on in the Senate over, you know, another element of this carbon price. He has been very aggressively against that. And you can see a world in which the folks that are in his office scrutinizing bills, as one does, see the words carbon pricing and just freak out. We don't support carbon pricing. We can't support carbon pricing. And then, as Mr. Poilievre is wont to do, as Bob alluded to, he will seize on a piece of information and distort it out of reality. He lies. And so when you take this and then he manipulates it to make it look like something that it isn't so that he can stand pat on his ideological principle, that's where sometimes, you know, then questions start getting asked, and then one wonders, is this guy have what it takes to convince Canadians he ought to be Prime Minister?
Joël Denis?
On that point, making stuff up, I think it's happening also in Canada, because the Conservative Party has been saying in French that the carbon tax applies in Quebec, but it's not the case. It's a different system, and so we had to deconstruct that kind of story narrative. But the Quebec Tory MPs have keep repeating it in the House of Commons over and over again, and we've had some reports telling the people that this is not the case. So it is happening in this case in Ukraine with the free trade agreement and the vote, but also it's been happening before that in the case of Quebec, where there's no carbon tax. There is a cap and trade system that is in place in Quebec, but it's not a carbon tax.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you also mentioned the debate that's happening in the Senate, and I think that's also a worthwhile topic to explore, because we also saw Andrew Scheer, the Conservative House leader, put out this wanted poster and putting on it two Liberal senators, both of whom women, one racialized, one differently abled, which caused some great debate and controversy this week. Did Andrew Scheer go too far? Is this a bad look for the Conservatives, as you were pointing out, leading right now in the polls?
Well, first of all, he should have thought this through, because he put their posters up and said, call in. And on top of that, Don Platt, who was the Senate leader, went over and was really angry at two of these women and was yelling and screaming at them in the in the Senate chamber, and it just looked like a really bullying, nasty partisanship. To Don Plett's credit, he got up in the Senate chamber on Thursday evening and he apologized sincerely, I think, to the people who he was yelling at. In the case of Mr. Scheer, a former House of Commons Speaker, former leader of the Conservative Party, not a word of apology, because he frightened those women with what he put up on social media, because they were threatened by people calling their offices. In fact, one of the senators even left her home over the weekend because she was very concerned for her safety. And this is a black woman, and so he went too far. But he hasn't got the guts to apologize.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that, it's now a police investigation because she left her home because someone called and threatened to actually get her in her home. Stephanie, what do you make of it?
If there is no, unfortunately, better example of the reality we're in now, which there used to be a time when we were very all content to be like, well, you know, social media is not the real world. This is a classic case example of how what is said and expressed on social media can be twisted, distorted, and have actual real-world physical security implications for people. There's no straighter line than you can be drawing right now, and we've been drawing it, I think, for weeks with the conflagration in the Middle East and the explosion of hate and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia we're seeing in this country. So for right now, at this moment in time, with social media being the cesspool of violence and hate and anger that it is, to use that as a mechanism to convince people to do what people actually ought to do, right, Michael? They ought to be calling elected or appointed representatives to voice their opinions about legislation. But to do that on social media, when right now all that medium is a place of hate, just seems so inexcusable, I suppose, and another further poisoning of our democratic discourse.
Yeah, I mean, and to that, I don't know if you can make a call on social media in this day and age that doesn't come out as anger. I don't think people go on social media, by all means, have a gentle conversation and raise this issue. I think immediately goes to the anger part. What do you say? I
agree. I think social media, Twitter, Facebook is a pipeline for hateful discourse, and I'm not too present on that. I prefer to be reading traditional media, mainstream media. But going back to
we want our salaries.
But going back to Bob's point about Mr. Andrew Scheer, I don't recognize Mr. Scheer since he resigned as leader. He's a different person. He was the Speaker of the House of Commons. He knows what the rules are of parliamentary privilege, parliamentary respect, and all that. But I sense that Mr. Scheer, since he's the House leader of the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre, he lost, I think, the notion of respect for institutions, and all that matters is gaining power. To me, that's the picture that I have of Mr. Scheer right now.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how people continue this conversation after it, which we'll revisit. But right now, I also want to get your opinions on the fall economic statement. Of course, that was delivered this past week as well. A number of things, as expected, the Liberals making promises when it comes to affordable housing, go into rental construction, but also absent a path to balance. And a lot of economists were talking about that after the FES. Is this an issue that will make this government even more vulnerable than it is, Bob?
Yes, potentially, because they don't know how to restrain spending. It's not in their DNA. We've seen this. Since 2019, there's been $100 billion of new spending. We're now at $526 billion of federal spending. And she's saying, Ms. Freeland, the finance minister, is saying, well, we hope by 26, 27, we'll be down to about 1% of GDP of our deficit. But this is going to be before an election campaign. So knowing the Liberals, can you really see them acting with restraint as we head into an election campaign, which probably, if it doesn't happen next fall, in time with the election in the United States where they can run Poilievre again and compare him to Trump, it'll happen in 2025, so it has to happen, and I just can't see them meeting that target of 1%.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also that the Business Council of Canada really saying that it's the debt servicing is going to exceed how much is invested in healthcare. Yeah. Sorry, Joël Denis.
I would say that this, I think the economic statement of this week is a turning point in politics, because for the first time we can see that interest rate payments are higher than any other items in the budget. And I think we're taking being collectively conscious that we've maxed out the credit card in Ottawa, and it's time to come back to some spending control. And in the past, the Liberals talk about modest deficit. We live with that. We had the COVID crisis, but now the deficits are part of the structure of the spending in Ottawa, and we're sort of not far away from reliving the 1970s, whereas spending was out of control, deficit was out of control, the debt was out of control, and it led us to what? Some kind of austerity in one way, because we had no choice to face our financial obligation. And I think this is a turning point this week, that financial fiscal update.
Stephanie?
Well, and also what's notable, right, is the places where they're spending money. I mean, of course, every government has to make choices. Not that this Liberal government necessarily has always made those choices. They've just spent it all on everything. But there's two big things that are not in this fall economic statement, and it's not clear where or when they're coming. One of them is the billions, literally billions, the Defense Department needs. The Defense Department is out of money. We are out of guns. We are out of bullets. We are out of tanks. We are out of everything. And they are
also.
Of people, of housing, of all the things the defense, our military needs. We don't have any of it. And there was not a dime for defense spending in here. And that really raises some questions about, is that what the Liberals mean? But to Bob's point, they can't possibly not be spending another dime on defense. So what about those fiscal guardrails? How real can those be? But the second politically sensitive thing is pharmacare. Yeah. I mean, we're waiting on this multi-billion-dollar national pharmacare promise plan that is part of the deal with the New Democrats. No money booked for it. The New Democrats are dancing around, well, whether it's coming or whether it's not, it's part of the deal. So, with this government, either they're going to just not do it, and at some point they're going to have to admit that and take the political heat that's going to follow, or they are going to do it. And again, so there we go into big, big deficit land.
Yeah, well, that was a question I kept asking people. How much can you rely on these numbers if you're not factoring pharmacare? Because we know that the NDP want a public system. So I think that's a big question mark going into the next federal budget.
And the price tag of pharmacare. Yeah. It's $13 billion per year once it's fully implemented.
They can't possibly do pharmacare.
Unless you raise taxes, or you need to raise revenue somehow to be able to pay those big ticket items.
Stephanie's point on the defense stuff, our allies are not taking us seriously anymore. They don't even care if we're at the table, because we don't match them in terms of trying to increase defense budget in a world where China is a threat in the Southeast Asia, around the world, frankly, and Russia's threatening Ukraine, and we have a war in the Middle East. Allies want us to step up to the plate. Australia has replaced Canada as the United States' most valuable partner.
The creation of AUKUS.
Right, and I don't think they're going to spend the money.
And Australia is a few miles away from the United States.
Yeah. But also, I think we can also circle back to where we were before with Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives. Again, the Conservatives have traditionally been very strong on defense, very supportive of funding the military. And right now, we're not hearing any of that out of Mr. Poilievre, right? He decries defense cuts, sorta. He leaves that mostly to James Bazan and other folks in his caucus. But I mean, I think it's probably fair to make a guess that Mr. Poilievre is not interested in defense spending either. And that, too, will be a weakness for him probably come the next election.
Okay. Well, last word to you, Stephanie. But thank you very much for the time. We'll be back. You're smiling. I know you want to say more. We'll talk next week. Bob, Stephanie, Joël Denis, thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.